The taste of blood was the first thing she became aware of. Copper and iron, sharp against her tongue, pooling from the split in her lip where the branch had caught her across the face somewhere back in the dark. Amara Whitfield pressed her forearm against her mouth and kept running, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant he had won. And she had decided 3 nights ago, lying on her back on a thin mattress in a cedar-walled room that smelled like old incense and older secrets, that she would rather be torn apart by the forest than spend one more hour as the property of brother Ezekiel Hargrove. Her bare feet found another route. She went down hard, palms skidding across wet leaves, and the pine needles drove themselves into the heels of her hands like 100 small punishments. Somewhere behind her, not close enough to see but close enough to feel, she heard the low mechanical cough of an engine moving slowly along the fire road. A truck, maybe 2. They had dogs with them now, she was almost sure of it, and the wind was blowing from her back to theirs, which meant she was already found and just didn't know it yet. She forced herself upright. Her legs were shaking in a way she did not recognize, as though they belonged to some other woman's body, and Amara had only borrowed them for the night. The rain had stopped an hour ago, or maybe 2. Time had become a strange, slippery thing out here, and the cold was climbing up from the ground into her bones. Through the trees ahead, she saw the small, impossible miracle of a light. Not headlights, not the searching beam of a flashlight. A steady yellow glow, low and warm, the kind that came from a window in a house. She did not let herself hope. Hope was a thing brother Ezekiel had taught her to fear, because hope was how he caught you. He let you believe, just for a moment, that he might be merciful, and then he closed his hand. But her legs carried her toward the light anyway, stumbling, tripping. One hand pressed flat against her ribs where something felt wrong and hot, and she thought, if I die on this man's porch, at least I will have died somewhere that had a light on. The house rose out of the mist, like something a child would draw. A long, low structure of stone and dark wood, with wide windows and a covered porch, and a chimney breathing soft gray smoke into the sky. There was no fence, no cameras she could see, no bearded men with rifles standing at the edge of the property, which had been the only kind of house she had known since she was 7 years old. Amara made it to the bottom step before her knees finally refused her. She went down slowly, almost gracefully, her hand catching the edge of the porch railing and then sliding off as her body folded, her cheek pressed against the wet boards. She could hear her own breathing, ragged and wrong, and she could hear the engine on the fire road, closer now, and she thought very clearly, as clearly as she had ever thought anything in her life. Please, God, if you are there, if you ever were there, do not let the man who lives in this house be a man like the ones I am running from. Then the door opened, and the light spilled out, and a voice said, Jesus Christ. Silas Thornburg was 41 years old, lived alone, and had not expected to find a woman bleeding on his porch at 3 in the morning. He had expected, if anything, to find a deer. Sometimes they came up close to the house in the early hours, drawn by the salt block he kept out by the rain barrel, and he had learned to read the particular rhythm of their hooves on the wet ground. What he had heard tonight, over the low murmur of the news program he'd left playing in the kitchen, had not sounded like hooves. It had sounded like a body falling. He knelt beside her. She was small, not short exactly, but reduced, the way people got when they had been running for too long without food. Her hair was a dark, rain-soaked cloud around a face the color of warm earth, and there was a cut across her mouth that was still weeping fresh blood. She was wearing a long cotton dress, the kind you only saw anymore in photographs from another century, and there was a bruise on her collarbone that had the unmistakable shape of a man's thumb. Silas had spent most of his adult life designing buildings. He was good at reading shapes, at understanding which lines were load-bearing and which were decorative, and he understood, looking at this woman, that almost every line of her was load-bearing, and every one of them was about to give way. "Ma'am," he said, because he did not know her name. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, her lips moved, and he had to bend close to hear. "They're coming," she whispered. "Turn off the light." He did not question it. He did not ask who they were, or why, or any of the 1,000 reasonable questions a reasonable man would have asked. He stood up, crossed the porch in 3 long strides, and flipped the switch beside the front door. The yellow glow died. He turned off the kitchen light through the window, and then the lamp in the living room, and the whole house went dark, except for the low red eye of the wood stove. Then he went back out and carried her inside. She weighed less than she should have. He could feel the small, sharp architecture of her shoulder blades through the thin fabric of her dress, and her skin was so cold it burned against his arm. He laid her down on the long leather couch in front of the stove, pulled the wool blanket off the back, and wrapped her in it. Her eyes were open now, but she was not quite looking at him. She was looking past him, at something that was not in the room. "I'm going to lock the doors," he said, keeping his voice low, "and then I'm going to come back and look at you, okay? I'm not going to call anyone. I'm not going to let anyone in. You're safe." The word landed on her face like a slap. She flinched. He understood, in that small flinch, more about her than any of the questions he might have asked.
"I've got you. You're not going back out there. Whatever you're running from, it doesn't get through this door."
Safe was not a word her body believed anymore. Safe was a lie men had told her for so long that the word itself had become a kind of threat. Silas said instead, "I'm not going to let them take you." She closed her eyes, and a tear slid sideways into her hair, and she nodded once, a small broken nod, and then she was gone into whatever darkness her body had been fighting off for hours. He moved through the house the way a man moves through his own mind when he is trying not to think about something too large. He locked the front door, then the back. He closed the curtains in the living room and the kitchen, the ones he almost never closed because there was no one out here for miles to look in. He went down to the basement and turned off the breaker to the motion sensor lights along the driveway. He climbed back up and stood in the dark kitchen and listened. He heard an engine on the fire road. It was the unmistakable sound of a truck moving at search speed. Slow, deliberate, the engine held in a low gear. He could hear two male voices, indistinct, carried through the trees. Then a dog, not the hunting bay of a hound, the sharper, harder bark of something trained to find people. Silas's hands did something strange then. They curled into fists, and then uncurled, and then curled again. He had not been in a fight since he was 19 years old. He had spent the last 22 years of his life drawing lines on paper and building houses for people with more money than sense, and he had not thought of himself, in all that time, as a man who would stand in a dark kitchen and prepare to defend a stranger. He thought of himself that way now. If you've ever seen someone running, really running, you know that it looks nothing like the movies. It's ugly. It's wrong. The body moving past what it was built for. The face gone slack with exhaustion. The eyes not tracking anything except the ground ahead. And if you're watching this, and you've ever been that person, or loved someone who was, hit that subscribe button. Because this story is for you, and we're only getting started. The truck stopped at the end of his driveway. Silas heard the engine idle. He heard a door open, and then a second door, and he heard boots on the gravel. There was a long, terrible moment where he understood that if they came up to the house and knocked on his door, he was going to have to decide, in front of them, what kind of man he was. Then a voice called out, "Evenin'." It was a friendly voice. That was the worst part. It was warm and country and polite. The voice of a man who had just knocked on your door to sell you a vacuum cleaner. Silas stepped out onto the porch. He had pulled on a jacket and his boots, and he had, without quite deciding to, picked up the heavy walking stick he kept by the door, the one he used when he went out to check the creek after heavy rain. Two men stood at the bottom of his steps. Both wore dark, well-made coats. Both had beards trimmed in the same precise way, as though the same barber had done them. The taller one was holding the leash of a German shepherd that sat at heel, silent and alert, with eyes that did not move from Silas's face. "Help you?" Silas said. "Sorry to bother you at this hour, sir." The taller man smiled. It was a practiced smile, the smile of a man who had been told by someone in a conference room a long time ago that smiles put people at ease. "We're looking for a young woman. She's gone missing from our community. Confused, maybe. Off her medication. We've been out here most of the night." Silas made himself nod slowly. "What community is that?" "The Shepherd's Rest Fellowship. We're about 12 miles north of here, off County Road 7. "I know the place," Silas said, and he did, in the loose way a man knows the landmarks of his own county. There was a long private road that went back into the hills, and a gate, and a sign that said Shepherd's Rest, a place of peace, and he had always assumed it was one of those evangelical retreat centers where middle-aged couples went to work on their marriages. "You seen anyone come through here tonight?" The taller man said. The shorter one was watching the house, not the door, the windows, reading them. Silas shifted his weight. He let the walking stick tap once against the porch boards, a small sound that meant nothing and everything. "I've been up half the night with the storm," he said, "and I haven't seen anything except the usual. You got a number I can call if I do?" The taller man produced a business card. It was thick, cream-colored, with a tasteful little logo of a shepherd's crook. "Her name is Sister Amara," he said. "She's about 5'6", hair in a long braid. She might be frightened. It's very important that you call us first, not the sheriff's office. She has a history with them, and it complicates things. We just want to bring her home safely." Silas took the card. He did not look at it. "Sure thing," he said. The shorter man spoke for the first time. "Mind if we check your outbuildings? Just to be thorough?" Silas let a small silence happen. He could feel his pulse in his throat. He was aware very precisely of the woman inside his house, unconscious on his couch, with a bruise shaped like a man's thumb on her collarbone. "It's private property," he said mildly. "And I don't know you gentlemen. If you want to come back with the sheriff, I'm happy to walk you through anything you want." The shorter man's eyes flickered. The dog, at the taller man's side, made a low sound in its throat that was not quite a growl. "Of course," the taller man said, and his smile did not move. "Of course, sir. You have a good night. Call that number if you see anything." They turned. They walked back down the drive, unhurried, like men who had never once in their lives been told no and did not yet understand that it had happened. The truck's engine turned over, the headlights swung around, raked across the front of Silas's house, and then moved away down the fire road. Silas stood on the porch for a long time after they were gone. When he finally went back inside, he locked the door behind him, slid the heavy bolt, and then stood with his forehead pressed against the cold wood and made himself breathe. She woke slowly. The first thing she was aware of was that she was warm. Not the damp, shivering warmth of a woman huddled in wet clothes, but a deep, bone-level heat that came from somewhere under her. A heated blanket, she would realize later, laid on top of the couch cushions. The second thing she was aware of was that the pain in her ribs had been dulled to something more manageable, and that her palms and feet were wrapped in clean gauze. The third thing she was aware of was the man sitting across the room, watching her. He was sitting in a leather chair, about 10 feet away, with a book open in his lap that he clearly was not reading. He had a long, serious face, with deep lines at the corners of his eyes. His hair was dark, but going silver at the temples, in a way that made him look less like a man who was aging and more like a man who had been carved. He was wearing a dark gray sweater and jeans, and his hands, resting on the arms of the chair, were large and scarred across the knuckles in a way that suggested he had used them for work, not for harm. He did not move when he saw that she was awake. "Don't sit up too fast," he said. His voice was low. "You have 3 cracked ribs, I think. Maybe 4. I'm not a doctor." Amara did not sit up. She did not move at all. Her eyes tracked the room, the wood stove with its red glow, the long wall of books, the huge dark window that showed her nothing but her own pale reflection and the back of his head. She could not see a door from where she lay. That was a problem. Brother Ezekiel had taught her, without ever saying the words, that a room you could not escape from was a room you could die in. The man seemed to understand. He tilted his head toward his left. "Front door's that way," he said. "Bolted, but not locked from the inside. You can leave whenever you want. The key is on the hook by the door. My truck's in the garage. Keys are in the bowl on the kitchen counter. You won't get far barefoot, but you can have it if you want it." She stared at him. "Who are you?" she said. Her voice was a rasp. "My name is Silas Thornburg. I live here alone. This is my house, and you are welcome in it for as long as you need to be." "Why?" He did not answer immediately. He seemed to be considering the question seriously, as though no one had asked him why he did anything in a very long time. "Because I was the one who opened the door," he said finally, "and you were the one who was bleeding on the other side of it. I don't think there's a more complicated answer than that." Amara closed her eyes. In the compound, every kindness had been a transaction. A man who gave you an extra piece of bread expected something for it later. A woman who offered you a gentler word in the kitchen was working for someone, watching for someone. There had been no such thing as a gift. There had been only debts, taken and repaid. And a girl who forgot this was a girl who was punished for forgetting. She opened her eyes again. "They came here," she said. It was not a question. 2 men, a dog. They said you were from the Shepherd's Rest Fellowship and that you were off your medication. I've never taken medication in my life. I know. How? Silas hesitated. Then he said, "The older one, with the dog." His eyes moved the wrong way when he said it. People who are worried about someone don't lie that smoothly. Something in her chest, something small and ancient and nearly dead, turned over and began cautiously to breathe. "What did you tell them?" She whispered. "I told them I'd call if I saw anyone." "And if they come back?" Silas set the book down on the arm of the chair. He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped loosely. He looked at her with an expression that was not pity and not fear, but something quieter and steadier than either. "Then I'll tell them I still haven't seen anyone," he said. She began to cry, silently, without moving her face. The tears ran sideways down her temples into her hair. He did not come closer. He did not reach for her, or tell her that it would be all right, which was a kindness that a man who was used to the performances of other men would not have understood. He simply sat where he was and let her cry, because he understood, somehow, that a body that had not been allowed to cry in a very long time needed to cry alone, in its own time, with a witness who would not try to make it stop. After a long while she said, "My name is Amara." "I know," he said. "The man told me." I wasn't sure whether to believe him, but I believed that part. "My last name is Whitfield. My mother gave it to me before we went there. I don't use their name. I never did." "Amara Whitfield," he said, as though he were learning the shape of it. She almost smiled. It was the first time in 11 years that a man had said her full name in a voice that was not an accusation. The body remembers what the mind tries to forget. When Amara flinched at the word safe, when her eyes moved to the exits before they moved to his face, when her pulse spiked at the sound of a voice lowered to a whisper, that wasn't weakness. That was a nervous system that had been taught, over and over, that danger wore a kind face. Psychologists call this hypervigilance, and it's not something you can think your way out of. It's something the body has to learn, slowly, over time, in the presence of safety. And what Silas understood, without having the vocabulary for it, was that the first gift he could give her was space. Smash that like button. If this is hitting you where you live, we've got a long road ahead. The first 3 days, she did not leave the couch. Not because she was too weak, though she was the first day and slept through most of the second, but because the house was too large. There were too many rooms, too many doors, too many windows. She had spent 11 years in a single 12 by 14 bedroom in a women's dormitory, and the open-plan great room of Silas Thornburg's house was, to her body, an impossible geography. He seemed to understand this too. He brought her things. A bowl of broth, with crackers on the side, a mug of tea that he set on the side table, and then moved 2 feet farther from her when he saw her flinch at its proximity, a pair of soft flannel pants and a long-sleeved shirt that he set on the arm of the couch, along with a note in careful block handwriting that said, "I think these will be close. If not, I can order others." The bathroom is the second door on the left down the hall. There is a lock on the inside. She read the note twice. There is a lock on the inside. No one had written her a sentence like that in her entire adult life. On the 4th morning, she walked into the kitchen. Silas was at the counter, pouring coffee. He was wearing the same gray sweater, or one like it, and reading glasses were pushed up into his hair. He looked up, saw her, and did the thing she was beginning to expect. He went still. Not the tense stillness of a man hiding something, but the deliberate stillness of a man who had learned that his own movements could frighten her. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning." Her voice was still a rasp, though less of one. "I wanted to say thank you." "You don't have to." "I want to." He set down the coffee pot. He turned, slowly, to face her fully, and she saw, for the first time in good light, how exhausted he looked. There were dark circles under his eyes. He had not, she realized, been sleeping. He had been sitting in the leather chair across from the couch at night, with a book on his lap, waiting to see whether the men would come back. "You haven't slept," she said. "Not much. Because of me. Because of them." The difference in those two sentences was so small and so enormous that she had to sit down at the kitchen table to absorb it. She sat, and he made her coffee, and he set it in front of her, and moved to the other side of the table and sat opposite her, and they looked at each other for a long moment across the steam. "I have to tell you what I'm running from," she said. "You don't." "I do. Because if you're going to keep me here, and I have nowhere else to go, Silas, I have no money and no family that isn't inside that place and no identification that wasn't issued by Brother Ezekiel himself. If you're going to keep me here, you deserve to know what's coming." Silas wrapped both of his hands around his own mug. He nodded once. "Then tell me," he said. And she did. She had gone to Shepherd's Rest with her mother when she was 7. Her father had died the year before, in a car accident on a slick road outside of Birmingham, and her mother, a young widow, overwhelmed, grieving, raising a little girl on a part-time paycheck from a beauty supply store, had gone looking for God. What she had found instead was a man named Ezekiel Hargrove, who had come to their church one Sunday as a guest preacher and had spoken about the community he was building in the hills, a place of peace, a place where single women and their children could be cared for and protected and loved. Her mother had believed him. For the first 2 years, Amara had almost believed him too. The compound had been beautiful. There were gardens and horses and a little schoolhouse where the children learned their letters and their psalms. There were other little girls her age. Her best friend had been a child named Ruthie, who had taught her how to braid a horse's mane. And there was a sense of purpose, of belonging, that a small fatherless girl had never known before. Then Amara had turned 13, and the rules had changed. Girls who had turned 13 were no longer permitted to go to the schoolhouse with the younger children. They were moved into the women's dormitory. They were given long dresses and longer braids, and were taught that their bodies were sacred vessels that belonged to God, which meant, though no one said it that plainly, that their bodies belonged to whichever of Brother Ezekiel's favored men he chose to give them to. Her mother had not understood. Her mother had kept believing, right up until the day she died of untreated pneumonia in the infirmary when Amara was 16, because the compound did not believe in worldly medicine for those of true faith. After her mother was buried, in a small plot of ground at the edge of the property, under a stone that said, "Only Sister Rebecca, beloved," Amara had stopped believing in anything. She had also, very quietly, started paying attention. She had noticed which trucks came and went through the main gate, and on what schedule. She had noticed that some of the girls her age disappeared after a few years and were said to have gone to sister communities in other states, though no letter from any of them ever reached the women's dormitory. She had noticed which of the men had keys to which buildings, and which of the women in the kitchen were willing, if you caught them at the right moment, to say things in a voice so low that you almost did not hear them. She had noticed Brother Ezekiel himself. He was in his early 60s. He had a silver beard and kind eyes, and a voice that could make a crowded room feel like a cathedral. He had been, to her, almost invisible for the first 9 years of her life in that place. A figure at the pulpit, at the head of the dinner table on feast days, at a distance. When she was 19, he had called her to his office for the first time. He had told her that he had been watching her since her mother died, that she had a special spirit, that he had prayed on it for many months, and that God had told him she was to be his 7th wife. She had smiled and thanked him. It was the only thing a girl in that room was allowed to do. She had, that same night, begun the slow, careful business of planning how to leave. It had taken her 2 years. 2 years of hiding small bills in the hem of an old coat. 2 years of stealing, a page at a time, a map of the county from the back of an old book in the schoolhouse library. 2 years of befriending the woman who drove the produce truck to the farmer's market in the valley, until the woman had agreed, one wet Tuesday morning, to leave the back unlatched. 3 nights ago, on the eve of what was to be her wedding, Amara had climbed into the back of that truck among the crates of cabbages and green tomatoes and had ridden, crouched and silent, 22 miles down the mountain. The truck had dropped its produce at a market that was not yet open. She had slipped out and run. She had been running ever since. When she was done talking, The sun had risen fully, and the coffee in both their mugs had gone cold. Silas had not interrupted her, not once. He had listened with the particular attention of a man who was used to reading blueprints, and who understood that every line mattered, that you did not skip over the ones that looked small because the small ones were where the whole thing held together or fell down. When she finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "His name is not Ezekiel Hargrove." Amara looked up sharply. "What?" "His name is not Ezekiel Hargrove. Or, it is now. But it wasn't always." Silas rubbed his thumb along the rim of his mug. "I'm going to tell you how I know that, and you can decide whether you want to hear the rest. Is that all right?" "Tell me." "When those men came to my porch, the taller one gave me a business card. After they left, I looked up the Shepherd's Rest Fellowship. There isn't much online. They've scrubbed what they can, but there's enough. A reporter out of Tennessee did a piece on them 4 years ago. She went missing about 6 months after it ran. Officially, it's unsolved." He paused. The piece mentioned that the founder, the man currently calling himself Ezekiel Hargrove, was believed to have been a man named Jeremiah Voss, who ran a similar community in Idaho in the 90s. That one ended with a federal raid and 3 convictions for trafficking minors. He was never charged. He disappeared. Amara felt the blood drain out of her face. "He started over," she whispered. "He started over," Silas agreed. "And he got better at it." She put her hands flat on the table, because her hands were shaking. "I can't go to the police," she said. "You heard what the man told you. He said don't call the sheriff, she has a history with him, it complicates things. That's not just a lie to you, it's a lie he's told to other people. He has people in that office, he has money. He has—" "I know. I don't have anything. I don't have a birth certificate. I don't have a social security card. Legally, Silas, I don't exist. He could have me back in that compound in a week, and no one would ever know I was gone, because no one outside of that place knows I was ever alive." "I know," he said again very gently, "and that's why we're not going to do it that way." She stared at him. "What way, then?" She said. He stood up. He took their cold mugs to the sink and washed them slowly, and when he turned back to her, she saw on his face the expression of a man who had been thinking, for 3 days and nights while she slept, about a problem whose shape he was only now beginning to see. "I know a reporter," he said. "A different one. She's in New York. I designed her sister's house 6 years ago, and we've stayed in touch. She's good, she's careful, she works with survivors." "A reporter," Amara said slowly. "You want me to tell my story to a reporter?" "I want you to decide what to do," Silas said. "I'm telling you what exists. You decide what we do with any of it. But I want you to hear me say something, Amara, and I want you to really hear it." He crossed the kitchen. He did not touch her. He sat down in the chair next to hers, not across from her, and he turned the chair slightly so that they were both facing the window and the morning light and the long slope of pine trees going down to the creek. "You don't owe me a plan," he said. "You don't owe me a story. You don't owe me anything at all. You can stay here for one more night, or you can stay here for one more year. You can use my truck, you can use my name on whatever paperwork you need. You can rest for as long as your body needs to rest, and not do one single useful thing for anyone, and it will still be true that letting you in that door was the right thing to do." She could not speak. He was looking out the window, not at her, which was a mercy. "The only thing I ask," he said, "is that you let me be on your side." Pause here. Take a breath. If someone you loved said to you, "Right now, I don't need you to have a plan, I just need you to let me be on your side," what would that do to the part of you that still thinks you have to earn rest? Drop a heart in the comments. If someone, somewhere, has ever said something like that to you, and if no one ever has, drop a heart anyway, because I'm saying it to you right now. Back to the story. Spring came to the Appalachian foothills, the way it always did, in fits and starts, warm afternoons followed by frost at dawn, the dogwoods blooming pink along the creek, while the higher slopes were still gray and bare. Amara had been in Silas's house for 6 weeks. She had begun, by small degrees, to live. The first time she cooked a meal in his kitchen, a pot of black-eyed peas with onion and smoked ham hock, the way her mother used to make them before the compound. She had stood at the stove afterward and wept, because she had not known, until that moment, how much of her mother she had been carrying inside her own hands. Silas had come in from the back, seen her face, and without a word taken down 2 bowls and set the table. The first time she walked the property line with him, a 2-mile loop through his acres, along the creek, and up around the back ridge and down through the old apple orchard his grandfather had planted. She had realized halfway through that she had gone a full 20 minutes without looking over her shoulder. She had stopped on the path. She had turned to him wide-eyed and said, "I forgot to be afraid." He had said, "That's how it starts." The first time she laughed, really laughed, not the careful small laugh she had learned to give men at the compound so that they would leave her alone, but a real laugh that came up out of her belly, had been at something stupid. He had been trying to teach her to use his espresso machine, and the milk steamer had sputtered and sprayed foam up his sleeve, and he had said something so quietly and so dryly about the state of modern engineering that she had put her face down on the kitchen counter and laughed until her ribs ached. He had watched her laugh with an expression on his face that she did not, at first, know how to read. Later, lying in the guest bed with the door closed and the small brass key to her own bedroom under her pillow, a key he had given her on the second day without her asking, she had understood the expression. He had been looking at her the way a man looks at a thing he has not let himself want. He was, she was learning, a man who had built his whole life around not needing anything. She learned this in pieces. In the bookshelves that ran along 3 walls of the great room, which held almost no novels, almost everything was history, biography, architecture, philosophy. The sort of books a man reads when he is trying to understand something larger than himself. In the kitchen, which was stocked with excellent, simple ingredients and no family recipes. In the framed photograph on the mantel of a little boy and a man holding a fishing rod, which Silas had taken down on the 2nd week and put in a drawer when he caught her looking at it, and which he had never explained. She learned it also in the way he talked. He did not talk much. When he did, his sentences were short and careful, as though he had learned, a long time ago, that speech was a thing that could be used against you. One night in the 6th week, after dinner, they were sitting out on the back porch. The sun was going down behind the ridge, and the creek was running high from the spring melt, and she had wrapped herself in one of his flannel shirts because the evenings still turned cold. She had been there long enough now that the silences between them had stopped feeling like a thing to be filled. She said, very quietly, "Who was the little boy in the photograph?" Silas was silent for so long that she thought he was not going to answer. Then he said, "His name was Isaac. He was my nephew, my sister's son. He died when he was 9 years old." "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago." She waited. Silas was looking out at the creek. His hands were very still on the arms of the chair. "My sister was in a bad marriage," he said. "Worse than I understood at the time. I was 24 years old. I was finishing my degree. I was going to move to Chicago for a job at a big firm. She called me about 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave. She said she needed help. She said she was going to leave him, and she needed somewhere to go, and could she and Isaac come stay with me?" He stopped. "I said yes," he went on. "Of course I said yes. I told her to come in the morning. I was tired, Amara. I was finishing a final project. I told her in the morning, and I went to bed, and she—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. Amara sat very still in her chair. The creek ran on. The last light was gone from the ridge, and the first stars had come out, faint and cold. After a while, she reached across the space between them. She took his hand. It was the first time she had touched him on purpose, not brushing past him in the kitchen, not accepting the handle of a mug he was passing her, but reaching, deliberately, for the hand of a man who was in pain. He looked down at their hands, like a man looking at something he did not know how to hold. "I thought," he said, his voice gone rough, "that I was the kind of man you could not trust to protect someone. I thought I had proven that. I thought that was the end of the story about me." "It wasn't," she said. "I know that now," he said. "But I had to have a woman bleed on my porch to learn it." She did not know what to say to that. There was nothing to say to that. She held his hand and the creek ran on, and after a long while he turned his hand over and let his fingers close around hers. It was the first time since she was a child that she had held a man's hand and not been afraid. The reporter came in the 7th week. Her name was Delphine Marchetti, and she was small and dark and sharp-eyed and had driven 11 hours from Brooklyn in a beat-up Subaru with a legal pad and 3 recording devices and a bag of good coffee from a shop in her neighborhood because, she said, she had a feeling about the coffee situation in rural Appalachia, and she had been correct. She had interviewed Amara for 6 hours across 2 days. She had asked questions that were careful and specific and had never, not once, made Amara feel that she was a specimen instead of a person. She had cried at one point in the kitchen, quietly, with her hand over her mouth, when Amara had described the infirmary where her mother had died. She had apologized for crying. Amara had told her that was the first time anyone who was not from the compound had ever cried for Rebecca Whitfield, and that her mother would have thanked her. On the second evening, Delphine had sat at the kitchen table with Silas across from her and had said, "This is a big story. I want you to understand what that means." Silas had said, "Tell us." "It means," Delphine said, "that it is going to take me minimum 4 to 6 months to verify everything to the standard a piece like this needs. It means I'm going to have to talk to federal contacts in Idaho, in Oregon, in Tennessee. It means that when this runs, it is going to run loud, not just as an article, as a book probably, as a podcast series almost certainly, as a federal case, if I do my job right." She looked at Amara, "And it means that the man currently calling himself Ezekiel Hargrove is going to know that you are the source within about 10 minutes of publication. There is no version of this story in which you are anonymous, Amara. Your face is going to be on a magazine cover. That is the honest version of what I am offering you." Amara had sat with this for a long time. She had looked at Silas. Silas had not looked back. He had been watching his own hands on the table, because he had understood, with the silent instinct that he seemed to bring to every room he was in with her, that this was not his decision, and that she did not need to feel his opinion in the air. She had looked back at Delphine. "My friend Ruthie," she had said, "is still in that compound. She was my age. She taught me how to braid a horse's mane when I was 7. She will be Brother Ezekiel's 8th wife by now, or someone else's. And there are girls younger than her. There are girls who are 11 and 12 and 13, and they are going to be married off to old men in the next 5 years if someone does not blow the roof off that place." She had looked at Silas then. He had looked up, and she had seen on his face something she did not have a word for, something old and new at the same time, something that had the shape of grief and the shape of pride in the same expression. "I want my face on the cover," she had said. "Put it on the cover. There's a concept in trauma psychology called post-traumatic growth. It's different from resilience. Resilience is what lets you survive. Growth is what happens after. It's what happens when a survivor takes the thing that was done to them and turns it into something that could not have existed without it. A voice, a purpose, a life aimed at someone other than themselves. It doesn't happen to everyone. It doesn't happen fast. But when it happens, it is one of the most extraordinary things a human being can do. Tap the subscribe button right now if you believe that, because the last third of this story is where growth becomes the whole point. In the 8th week, he kissed her. He did it badly. They had been making dinner. She had been chopping onions at the counter, and he had been doing something with a cast-iron pan, and the kitchen had smelled like garlic and butter, and she had reached across him for the salt, and he had reached across her for a spoon, and they had both stopped moving. She had looked up at him. She had been looking up at him more and more, in recent weeks. She had learned the particular color of his eyes in different lights. Gray in the morning, green at dusk, something warmer in lamplight. She had learned the way the lines around his mouth deepened when he was trying not to smile. She had learned that he smelled, improbably, of cedar and ink, and a very faint, very clean sweat, and that when he stood this close to her, her body did a thing her body had never done before, which was forget to be afraid. "Amara," he said. "Yes. I have to tell you that I—" He stopped. He did not stop like a man who had forgotten what he was going to say. He stopped like a man who had just understood that what he was going to say was not something he was going to be able to take back. She set down the knife. She put her hand, very lightly, against the center of his chest. She could feel his heart beating under her palm. She had not known Until that moment, that a man's heart could beat as hard as that for her, without anger in it. "Say it," she said. So he bent his head, and he kissed her. It was bad. The way first kisses by honest people are bad. Their noses bumped. He tilted his head the wrong way, and then corrected too far. She laughed, into his mouth, and he laughed, and then he pulled back an inch and looked at her with such naked terror that she realized, with a small shock, that he had been certain, absolutely certain, right up until the moment her mouth curved under his, that she was going to flinch. "I'm not afraid of you," she said. "I know. I'm afraid of a lot of things, Silas. I'm afraid of a man in a truck, and a phone ringing in the middle of the night, and the sound of boots on gravel. But I am not afraid of you. I have not been afraid of you since the night I crawled onto your porch. I didn't think I would ever. I know. I told myself for 20 years that I was not. I know." He pressed his forehead against hers. "I am 41 years old," he said, "and I have never loved anyone the way I love you. I didn't think I had it in me. I didn't think whatever part of a person does that, I didn't think mine worked." "It works," she said. "How do you know?" "Because I can feel it," she said. "And I know what it feels like when a man looks at a woman and sees something he wants to own. You do not look at me like that. You look at me like I am a thing you want to watch become free. Nobody has ever looked at me like that before." He did not answer. He kissed her again. And this one was not bad. They had 4 more weeks. 4 weeks in which the dogwoods finished blooming and the creek slowed from its spring rush to its summer murmur. 4 weeks in which he cleared out a small south-facing bedroom on the 2nd floor and told her that she could use it as a writing room if she wanted, because Delphine had asked her to start keeping a journal of everything she remembered, in her own words, so that when the time came there would be pages in her own voice to draw from. 4 weeks in which she slept, for the first time, in his bed. They had talked about it first. They had talked about it for a long time, sitting on the back porch in 2 chairs pulled close together, because Silas was a man who understood that touch was a language a body had to relearn, slowly, and that a body that had been taught, its whole adult life, that its only value was its availability needed to discover, one small yes at a time, what its own desire actually felt like. When she had finally, on a warm Tuesday night in late May, walked across the hall and opened his bedroom door, she had done so because she had wanted to. It was the first thing, in 11 years, that she had done only because she had wanted to. He had looked up from his book. He had set the book aside. He had held out his hand, and she had crossed the room, and she had put her head on his chest, and she had fallen asleep that way, fully clothed, with his hand resting flat and still between her shoulder blades, and she had slept for 10 straight hours without a dream. When she woke up, she had cried, not because she was sad, because her body had, for the first time in her life, let go. Here's what I want you to understand about what just happened in that story. Amara didn't fall in love because Silas rescued her. That's not what this is. She fell in love because for the first time in her life, a man made a room in his world that she was allowed to leave. Not a rescue, an invitation, and she walked into it, and then she walked deeper in, and every step was hers. If your body has ever known the difference between being wanted and being claimed, between being loved and being kept, you know what I'm talking about. Let me know in the comments. I'm reading every one. Delphine called in the 14th week. She called at 7 in the morning, which was not her pattern. Silas picked up, listened for 20 seconds, and then walked the phone into the bedroom where Amara was still half asleep. "It's Delphine," he said. "You need to hear this." Amara sat up. She took the phone. "Amara," Delphine's voice was tight. "Listen to me carefully. I just got a call from a source inside the compound, someone I've been working very quietly for the last 2 months. She says Ezekiel Voss, whatever we're calling him. She says he knows where you are. She doesn't know how. She thinks there was a man at a gas station in Charlottesville who recognized you 3 weeks ago when you went in for groceries. Someone made a call." Amara's hand tightened around the phone. "How long?" she said. "I don't know, but she said he left the compound yesterday with 3 men. She said he was, and I'm quoting her, very calm, which from what I've learned about this man is the thing to be most afraid of." Silas was watching her from the doorway. "What do you need me to do?" Amara said. "I need you to get out of that house today. I've already booked you 2 rooms under a different name at a place in Asheville. I'll meet you there tonight. The piece is going to press in 10 days, Amara. 10 days. He's trying to get to you before we run. If he gets to you, there is no peace, because you are the peace. Amara closed her eyes. 10 days. Silas, she said. He was already moving. They left the house at noon. He had packed a single duffel bag for her. Clothes, her journal, the small envelope of cash he had been setting aside for her for weeks without telling her. He had packed another bag for himself. He had walked through the house, room by room, turning off lights, closing curtains, checking locks, and she had watched him do it, and understood that he was saying goodbye to a house he might not come back to. They took his truck. He drove the long way, down the back roads, through 3 different counties, doubling once through a town so small it had a single traffic light. He did not look at her often, but when he did, he looked at her the way he had looked at her the night he had carried her inside, like she was a thing that mattered. They had been driving for 3 hours when they saw the black pickup truck in the rearview mirror. Silas's hands tightened on the wheel. He did not say anything for a long moment. Then, very quietly, he said, "Amara, look down, get low." She got low. "How many?" "2 in the front. I can't tell in the back." "How far?" Half a mile, closing." She could hear the engine of Silas's truck working harder. She could hear the gravel under the tires change. They had turned onto something smaller, a fire road, one of the 1,000 unnamed back roads that lace through these hills. Silas had grown up on these roads. He knew them the way she had, as a child, known the back halls of the compound, which was to say that he knew them with the kind of knowledge that did not live in his head but in his hands. "I need you to trust me," he said. "I trust you. I'm going to put us off the road up here. There's an old logging trace that cuts down to the creek. They won't be able to follow at speed. I'm going to drop you at a place I know, and I'm going to lead them in the other direction. You stay there. Delphine is 3 hours out. I'm going to call her. She comes to you. Do not come looking for me." "Silas." "Amara." "Silas, no. Listen to me." His voice was steady. It was the steadiest thing in the world. "I am not the hero of your story. I'm not going to die out here. I'm going to lead them around for an hour and lose them in the national forest and come find you by tomorrow morning. But if I don't, if something goes sideways, if I don't make it to where you are, you do not come looking for me. You get to Delphine. You finish the piece. You let my choice be the thing that let you finish it. Do you hear me?" She was crying. "I hear you," she said. He pulled the truck hard to the right, off the road, onto a track that was barely a track at all. The truck bucked and slammed. Branches whipped against the windshield. They dropped down through a stand of hemlock and came out in a clearing at the edge of the creek, where there was a small wooden cabin half hidden in the kudzu. "My grandfather built that," he said. "Nobody's been in it in 15 years. There's canned food. There's a phone that works on the wall. It's old, but it works. The number for Delphine is in the duffel. Go, now." "Silas." He stopped. He looked at her. "I love you," she said. She had not said it to him before. He closed his eyes. "Amara Whitfield," he said, "I have loved you since the moment you told me to turn off the light." He leaned across the seat, and he kissed her, once, on the forehead, and then he was pulling her door open, and she was out of the truck with the duffel in her hand, and he was reversing hard, spinning the wheels in the wet leaves, and then he was gone back up the track toward the road. She stood in the clearing. She could hear his truck, and then, 30 seconds later, she could hear the black truck, and then she could hear nothing at all. The cabin was small and dark, and smelled of old wood and mice. She found the phone. It was mounted on the wall, mustard yellow, with a rotary dial. She opened the duffel. She found the slip of paper with Delphine's number. Her hands were shaking so badly she had to dial it 3 times before she got it right. Delphine picked up on the first ring. "Amara?" "He's drawing them off. He dropped me at a cabin. He said 3 hours. He said, 'I'm coming. I'm an hour and 40 minutes out. Stay inside. Stay away from the windows. I'm calling a contact at the state police on the other line. I'm going to find him, Amara. I'm going to find both of you.'" She hung up. She sat down on the dusty wooden floor of a cabin built by a man she had never met, and she put her head on her knees, and she waited. It was almost dark when the headlights came down the track. She had heard the engine a long way off. She had taken the small kitchen knife from the duffel. He had packed it for her, though neither of them had spoken about why, and she had pressed her back against the wall beside the door. She heard a car door open. She heard footsteps. She heard a woman's voice, sharp and specific, say, "Amara, it's Delphine. Amara, it's me." She opened the door. Delphine was standing there, pale, with her phone in her hand. Behind her, on the track, was the Subaru. There were no other cars. "Where is he?" Amara said. Delphine's mouth moved. "Where is he, Delphine?" Delphine swallowed. "Amara, the state police found the truck, about 40 minutes ago. It went off the road at the Clayton Bridge Pass. The driver's door was open. There was blood. They're searching the area. There's no body yet." "There's no body, Amara. Listen to me. That means he could be—" Amara was not listening anymore. She was standing in the doorway of a cabin in the Appalachian foothills, and the last light was going out of the sky, and somewhere out in the dark, a man who had opened a door for her in the middle of the night 3.5 months ago was either alive or he was not, and she understood, standing there with her hand still on the knife and the wind coming up the creek with the smell of rain in it, that the story was not over. It was not over at all. 3 days later, they found his jacket. 5 days later, they found a set of tire tracks that did not belong to any registered vehicle in the county. 7 days later, Delphine Marchetti's piece went to press, a 12,000-word investigation with Amara Whitfield's face on the cover and a subtitle that read, "The Woman Who Walked Out of Shepherd's Rest." Within 48 hours, federal agents executed a warrant on the compound. Within 3 weeks, a man who had called himself Ezekiel Hargrove was in federal custody on 16 counts, including charges he had first been investigated for under a different name in 1997. A girl named Ruthie was pulled out of a locked room in the infirmary. She was 29 years old. She asked, first thing, if Amara was alive. They told her yes. She wept. They never found Silas Thornburg's body. There was no funeral. Amara would not allow one. She moved into an apartment in Asheville that Delphine helped her find. She testified before a grand jury. She got her first birth certificate at the age of 28. She learned to drive. She got a library card. She walked into a coffee shop one morning in the 10th month after the piece ran and ordered a latte for the first time in her life without her hands shaking. The barista did not know that she was anyone. The barista called her ma'am and got her name wrong and made her a very bad latte. And Amara walked out into the October sunlight and understood that this was the thing Silas had meant on the porch on the night he told her about Isaac, when he had said, "I have loved you since the moment you told me to turn off the light." He had not meant that he had loved her from a place of rescue. He had meant that he had loved her from a place of recognition. One person, in the dark, finding another. On the anniversary of the night she had crawled onto his porch, a small package arrived at her apartment. No return address. Postmarked from a town in Montana she had never heard of. Inside was a single brass key, the kind that opens an old front door, and a piece of paper with a single line of careful block handwriting. "The light is still on." Amara Whitfield sat down at her kitchen table, and she wept, and she laughed, and she held the key in her closed fist, and she understood that some stories do not end. They open. If this story moved you, if you cried, if you felt something shift, if you know what it is to wait for someone, or to be the someone who made it out, do me a favor. Subscribe to the channel, share this video with someone who needs it, and tell me in the comments, would you get on a plane to Montana? Would you open the door? Would you turn the key? I'll see you in the next story. The light is still on.